Episode 20, Awkward First Dates.
First dates. They're like job interviews, but instead of trying to sell your skills, you're trying to sell your personality. And let's face it, sometimes your personality just doesn't want to show up to the interview. I remember going on a first date with a guy who showed up wearing a fedora. And not just any fedora, but a fedora that was way too small for his head. It looked like it was perched on top of his skull like a tiny little hat for a hamster. I couldn't stop staring at it, and I'm pretty sure he thought I was checking out his hairline. Then there was the time I went on a date with a guy who talked about his ex-girlfriend the entire time. I mean, I get it, we all have baggage, but this guy was treating our first date like it was a therapy session. And not even a good therapy session, like one of those awkward ones where you're just sitting there nodding and wondering how long you have to keep this up before you can make an excuse and leave. But my personal favorite awkward first date was with a guy who took me to a seafood restaurant. Now, I love seafood, but this place was a little too fancy for my taste. We were sitting there, trying to make small talk, when the waiter came over and presented us with a platter of raw oysters. Now, I had never had raw oysters before, and I was a little intimidated by the whole thing. But this guy was like, "Oh, you have to try them, they're amazing." So I tentatively took a bite, and promptly threw up all over the table. Needless to say, that was the end of that date. So, to sum up, first dates can be awkward, uncomfortable, and downright disastrous. But hey, at least they make for great stories to tell your friends. Just be sure to leave the fedora at home. Awkward first dates. It's like playing Russian roulette with your emotions. You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes you'll hit the jackpot and have an amazing time, and other times you'll be praying for the sweet release of death. But you know what they say, laughter is the best medicine. So, let me tell you about my own personal experience with an awkward first date. I once went out with this guy who seemed really nice on paper. We met up at a coffee shop and started chatting, and things were going pretty well until I noticed that he kept fidgeting with his hands. It was like he was playing some sort of invisible piano, and it was really distracting. So, being the curious person that I am, I asked him about it. Turns out, he had just started learning how to play the piano and was practicing in his head. In the middle of a date. Needless to say, it was a little awkward. But you know what's even worse than that? Going on a date with someone who's just plain rude. I once went out with a guy who spent the entire time checking his phone and barely acknowledging my existence. It was like I was on a date with his phone, not him. So, I did what any self-respecting person would do. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through Instagram. He didn't even notice, which just goes to show you how invested he was in the date. But you know what? Awkward first dates aren't all bad. They can make for some great stories. And who knows? Maybe you'll end up finding the love of your life despite the initial awkwardness. Or maybe you'll just end up with a really good story to tell at parties. Either way, just remember to embrace the awkwardness and keep on laughing. After all, what's life without a little bit of awkwardness? Awkward first dates. They're like a roller coaster ride, exhilarating at times, but mostly just nauseating. You know what's really awkward? When you arrive at the restaurant and you can't find your date. You're standing there, scanning the room like a lost puppy, wondering if you're in the right place or if you've just been stood up. And then, just when you're about to give up hope, you spot them. But then, as you make your way over to their table, you realize that you've forgotten their name. It's like a mental block, and you're just standing there, racking your brain, trying to remember what they told you. And then you're forced to go through the whole "I'm sorry, what was your name again?" routine. Smooth move, Casanova. And don't even get me started on the small talk. So, what do you do for a living? What kind of music do you like? It's like we're all just reading from the same boring script. But sometimes, the conversation can take a turn for the worse. Like the time I went on a date with a guy who wouldn't stop talking about his ex-girlfriend. I mean, I get it, we've all got baggage. But this guy had enough to fill a whole airport terminal. And then there's the food. You're sitting there, trying to delicately eat your spaghetti, and all you can think about is how it's going to end up all over your face. And if you're really unlucky, you'll accidentally spill red wine on your white shirt. Classy. But despite all the awkwardness, there's always a chance that the date could end on a high note. Maybe you'll share a laugh, or find out that you have something in common. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll both agree that you're better off as friends. So, to all you single folks out there, don't give up hope. Even the most awkward first dates can lead to something great. And if all else fails, at least you'll have some funny stories to tell your friends.
And that wraps up another laughter-filled episode of Not So Funny A. If you enjoyed the jokes generated by our AI algorithms, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our comedy-loving community.